All right. Welcome back to Jolo, everybody. Today it is just Joe. I'm excited today because I'm going to dive into a topic that is very pertinent in my own life right now, but a topic that Lauren and I, see come up so frequently in our Within program, in in our mentorships of others, in coaching of individuals one on one as well. And that's the topic of how to approach big decisions and how to think about creating a frame of reference to understand the upside and the downside. Because every time you make a big life decision, there are risks and there are also potential rewards. And I think a lot of us tend to get frozen in fear of what if things don't go as planned? So I'm going to talk about that today. And I'm going to use a frame that I've used over the course of my life, which was true when I started Cured, when I left corporate America, which is true now as I'm making big decisions with partnerships for the company, but is also true in all areas of life. So it's not just business, it's relationship, it's career, it's trajectory of, location, place, where do you want to be? Who do you want to be? And how do you make those decisions? Lauren is not joining today solely because we're getting very close to her giving birth to our son. And we're also going to be sharing a lot over the next several weeks about a free masterclass that we have coming up. It's a 28-day free masterclass launching on October 2nd. And over 28 days, Lauren brings you through in email a workshop or a masterclass on reinventing your relationships. So if you're not on our email list, make sure you go to our show notes now and you sign up for the 28-day masterclass completely free. If you're already on our email list, keep your eye out for that. That's coming very soon. We are constantly getting questions and constantly supporting individuals in our Within program and our one-on-one mentorships with relationships. A lot of the time, we think that the thing that we want to work on is something that's further away than the closest things to us, which are our intimate relationships, and even more close, our relationship with ourself. As we evolve our relationship with ourself, we evolve the way we relate with the world, with our closest relationships, with the people we work with our community. And so over the 28 days, you will be walking through a framework to reinvent all of your relationships and really get the love and relationships that you're looking for in life. So make sure you're on our email list. If you're not, click in the show notes and sign up for the 28-day masterclass. Again, that starts on October 2nd. If you're listening to this podcast after October 2nd, after it launches, make sure you get on our email list regardless. You can catch up on all the content, and we have a lot of exciting stuff going on the rest of the year. So let's dive into the podcast today. How to approach big decisions. When we are faced with decisions in life, we a lot of times, and this is true for me. So when I say we, think of the frame of I. This is my story. This has been true for me. It took me nearly 3 years to leave corporate America after I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And it took that long because I had a lot of what ifs. What if this didn't work out how I expected it to or how I wanted it to? What if I failed? What is going to happen? What would happen? And the way I like to frame big life decisions is one, first and foremost, getting extremely clear on our ideal outcome. That's where we need to start. What is the ideal outcome that's associated with us making this big life decision? Like if everything went perfect, how would our life look? What is the ideal outcome? And that's the most important place to start because we want to understand what our vision really is for making this decision. Why would we make this decision? How would our life be better? How would our relationships be better? How would we see that this decision changes the trajectory of our life? And if everything goes as planned, how big, beautiful, amazing would it be? Now start there. That's most important. For that future to be true, what would have to take place? Say you wanted to leave a career and you said, one day I want to build a business that I ultimately sell. So the ideal outcome is you build a business that's deeply impactful, it's purposeful, it's changing people's lives. You build it so big that you have a team, you have systems, and you have people from the outside looking in that are showing interest in your business. It's scalable, it's operating without you. You're not the center of the business. You're not fulfilling all the sales. You're not fulfilling all the marketing, the operations. That is a sellable business. You would have to work your way backwards all the way to where you are now, which would be in a corporate career or working for somebody else. So, ideal outcome, step by step by step, all the way back to your current reality. This is how we build systems. We start with the end in mind and we backtrack to our current life. To talk a lot about systems in the Within program, and I'm happy to dive into all of that in a later podcast as well. But that's where we need to start when we're making a big life decision. As we reverse engineer that process and we think about all the steps that would get us to that ideal outcome, we start thinking about what would go wrong, what could go wrong in the process. Because we would all love for us to make this big life decision and it goes perfectly and our ideal outcome becomes a reality. But we can all sit here and say that the likelihood of that happening or how often that actually happens, everything goes as planned, is typically very slim. Like most of the time, things don't go exactly how we plan. So great. We have an upper bound. We have what the ideal outcome would be, and we can understand what the steps along the path to that ideal outcome might look like. Now that we have a frame of reference of how I can get to where I want to go and what the ideal outcome is, we look at what can go wrong along the process. We have to ask ourselves, if those things go wrong, what will happen? And this is the most important piece of this whole decision making process, this whole idea of how to make big decisions. You have to go to the place of things going wrong. Because if you don't, you won't know how to respond when they do go wrong because things tend to go wrong. Maybe they won't be the worst case scenario, which we also want to talk about, but they will present you with challenges and opportunities that you have to respond to. Ryan Holiday, in one of his books, talks about going there, going to the darkest place, going to the worst case scenario, and working through it mentally. Because a lot of times in doing that, when things end up going wrong, we've already prepared ourselves for those situations to go wrong. That doesn't mean that they won't be hard, but it does mean that we will have thought through how we will respond. And the most important part and the most important thing, and more important aspect of approaching difficult decisions or big decisions is understanding that things can go wrong. And I've thought about how I will respond. If the things go wrong along the way, if you're deciding to leave a corporate career and things go wrong, how will you respond? I will share the example of how I thought about this when I was leaving my corporate career, because for me, I didn't really have the ability to take a complete 180 and go back into my engineering career. I worked for a federally funded company and then I went to be a cannabis entrepreneur. I wasn't going to be able to just turn around and be like, "Oh, yeah, like this is what I was doing in my business and will you take me back?" It kind of created a zero options mentality or a zero options situation, 0 second option situation, which is the thing that was the driver for me to sprint fully into what I wanted. So that's important in of itself. But it was also important for me to think about, what if things were to go wrong? We need to get clear on the worst case scenarios because we need to ask ourselves if we will be okay with those worst case scenarios becoming true. If that worst case scenario occurs, are you okay with it? Can you survive it? And a lot of times I believe that we have the fear of our worst case scenario being like death. I know when I was planning on leaving corporate America and working on changing my path in life, at first I thought about the worst case scenario, which was essentially running out of money. In my body, it felt like death. But then I just had to get clear whether that was true or not. Like if things go wrong, am I going to die? Because worst case scenario in life is we pass away. Like we don't get to fulfill the dreams and desires of our soul, what it is we really want to express in our life and what we want to feel. How will we feel alive? If we don't get to feel alive and we pass away, well, that's the worst case scenario, right? But in this situation, it was important for me to recognize that the worst case scenario wasn't death. And I want to remind all of you that that idea of running out of money, seeing your bank account at zero, is not as bad of a case scenario than you believe it to be. Will it be hard? For sure. 100%. Will it suck? For sure. Nobody wants to have that happen. It's not a comfortable place to be, but we're not asking for a comfortable life. We're asking for a fulfilling life. And so, what I recognize is that when approaching big decisions, approaching hard conversations, I want to have my ideal outcome. And then I will also want to have my worst case scenario. What's the worst possible thing that can happen? Because if I go to the best case scenario and then I go to the worst case scenario, I know that I'm going to end up somewhere in between or at one or the other. And it'll be great if everything goes right, and it'll suck, but I won't die if everything goes wrong. And the wild part about this is as those guardrails become the path that you get to decide, am I okay with signing up for this? Then you just go, you just take action. And along the way, you remember that those were the guardrails and you start to recognize if you're approaching one or the other. And this has happened consistently for me over the course of becoming an entrepreneur and scaling a business and building a business that I'm very proud of. And so I want to give two real life examples, one that is currently going on and then also the one which was Starting Cured. And so I've prefaced a lot of the conversation of Starting Cured, so I'll start with that one. When I was starting Cured, I was in a very comfortable corporate engineering job. I was in a place where I had great benefits. I could take off a decent amount of time per week, per year rather. I felt very stable in my career. There were bonuses, there were all the standard things, right? The health benefits, the insurance. A couple places that I worked, we would have off every other Friday. And it was just good enough to recognize that a lot of people could get trapped there. It's like, like it's just good enough, but it's not something that's fulfilling me at all. And it took me nearly 3 years to finally make the full decision to leave because I kept going through, well, first, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. As I got more clear on the potential direction of where I wanted to go, then I started to wrestle with what if it all goes wrong? And then I realized that there was a potential for me to get back into engineering in some form. Could I go back to corporate federally funded engineering? Maybe not. Maybe I could. I don't know. Like, I don't know how they think about the cannabis world because the rules and regulations are always changing. But I recognized that the upside for me was complete freedom of purpose and life path. That was like the ultimate outcome. I wanted to feel alive and able to make the decisions that I wanted to make with my life every day when I woke up. And that to me, and the belief of the ability to create financial freedom in that path and freedom of purpose, freedom of choice of time, that to me was the ultimate outcome and the ideal outcome. And I'll tell you, as an entrepreneur, as you start out, and for some time, you will feel tied to your business. You will feel like you created yourself another job and you have the worst possible boss, yourself. You just have to answer to yourself. So the truth is, you end up somewhere in between that ultimate outcome. And eventually you start to get closer and closer to that ideal outcome, or you end up at the worst case scenario. And what I recognized for myself, I was living in California at the time when I was planning on leaving my corporate engineering job. I had about $6,000 in cash and savings. So I had like not even 2 months. I typically say 2 months, but I maybe had like a month of I was living on my own. I was in an apartment complex. I probably was spending like 4 to 5 grand a month. And I think I had 6 grand saved up or something like that. So I recognized that I could run out of money pretty quickly. I recognized that if that were to be true, I wouldn't be able to afford rent. I wouldn't be able to live in California. And I am blessed to have parents that support me. I wrestled with them quite a bit when I said I wanted to become an entrepreneur. Like, you work so hard to get the engineering degree and you have such comfort and you have such stability. And so it took some time to even get them on board with what it is I wanted to do. But I recognized for me that if everything were to go wrong, everything, like the business just completely failed, I took the leap, everything went wrong. The worst case scenario for me was ending up at my parents' house, was like moving back home. Were my parents going to take me in? They would take me in. They would allow me to move home. They would allow me to sleep in one of their spare bedrooms, and they would support me in going out and finding another job. And so that for me was the reality of the worst case scenario. My upper bound was the freedom of life, purpose, and finances and money. And the lower bound, the worst case scenario was me having everything go wrong and me ending back up living with my parents. And the irony of all of this is that both became true. And I think that that's what's important to understand, that once you've created your upper bound and your lower bound, that doesn't mean just one's going to happen and only one. You may bounce between the two. I ended up running out of money very quickly. I had $30,000 stolen from me in my third month of business. I ended up having to move home, but my business kept going. I doubled down. I ended up asking for the ability to move home and move back into my parents' spare bedroom after I had moved out of their house, whatever, 6 years before, after I graduated college. And or I guess I moved out before I even graduated, but like when I went to college. So I hadn't lived with them since I was 18 years old. And there I was, 26, 27. I would have been 27 at the time where I ended up moving home. And no, it had been 28. Yeah, 28. And so the worst case scenario became real. Like I moved home. I was like, oh, I'm home, but my business is still going. And I continued and I doubled down and I recognized that I had the resilience and I recognized that I would do anything to figure it out. And I started to teach myself that I could do the things and could continue even if the worst case scenario happens. It didn't mean everything was over. And the flip side of that is I have continued for 7 years since then, and I have more financial freedom. I have more time freedom, and I have more purpose freedom than I've ever had before. I am on purpose and I dictate my schedule every day. Now, I work a lot and I get to decide to do that because I want to continue to grow the business. And I am building this business to impact people, and I am building this business to one day exit it. And so both have been true. I've been bouncing between the upper bound and the lower bound. And I think that that's the beautiful piece that needs to be recognized for everybody when you're making a decision is maybe it's not just a concrete ideal outcome and maybe it's just not a concrete worst case scenario. I mean, the same thing is true in a partnership that we've been working at Cured, and I'll keep it a little bit vague for the protection of the partnership. But in going into this partnership, I had to really think about, okay, what is the upside and what is the potential downside? And my business partner and I had to walk through every piece of it. And the upside was 30, 40, maybe $50 million enterprise value. And the downside was, well, this all happens and our contract will last this long and we'll probably lose about $300,000. And I had to ask myself, am I okay with that? Am I okay with losing $300,000? And what has actually happened is at this time, we've lost $233,000. And it sucks to say that. It really sucks to say that. And I still think it can turn around. It has the potential to. It's hard conversations, it's negotiations, it's changing of the deal structure, it's managing cash differently, managing models differently. It could end up that it doesn't end up working out. And we did lose probably about $300,000. And the worst case scenario, the lower bound of what I envisioned in making this decision, which if you've been listening to this podcast for some time now, it started off in the direction of creating that ideal outcome. And, you know, was I blinded by that ideal outcome? Maybe. And if I was approached with the same deal structure in the future, would I be a little bit more skeptical? Maybe, but I don't know. Like, I really don't know because I can't go back and do it over again. And so the most important thing for me was to recognize that I would balance between the worst case scenario and the best case scenario. And it still may be true. I've had difficult conversations over the last several weeks. Things are out on the table, we're clear. And also at the same time, you know, I recognize that I'm going to survive it. We will survive it. The company will survive it. Everything comes down to, am I willing to do whatever it will take to allow those guardrails to be true, understand both possible case scenarios, both possible outcomes, but just take action. Because that's the thing is once you've developed your guardrails, once you've developed your best and your worst case scenario, you got to just take action because that worst case scenario is scary, but it is not death. It's not the death of you. It's not the death of your story. It's not the end of your story. And even if the worst case scenario becomes true, it actually becomes part of the next evolution of your story because you'll only learn from it and you'll only become stronger from it and you only become more confident to approach bigger and more difficult situations along your journey. And so I want everybody to walk away from this podcast recognizing that the worst case scenario is probably not as bad as you think it is. And you need to go there. You need to be okay with it. You need to be okay with, okay, this is what would happen. And I know what the best case scenario would be, and just take action now. The more you sit there and the more you play the game of worst and best case scenario, the more likely those things are just going to slip away. The most likely those opportunities are going to just pass you by, and you're going to look back on those times and you're going to have resentment for yourself for not taking action. And so for me, I think that's one of the greatest lessons of entrepreneurship, but we can take that into every area of our life, every decision that we make. You know, most of the time you're going to end up somewhere in between. In most decisions, you're going to end up somewhere in between. Other times, you're going to end up at the best case scenario. Other times, you're going to end up at the worst case scenario. And then a lot of times, you're going to bounce between the two. And that's what I've recognized to be true for almost all of the big life decisions. For me, I've bounced between the two. Like it hasn't been perfect. Things have gone wrong, but I have learned a lot from all of it. And I have become more confident in myself and I have gotten to quicker decision making. And I think that that's one of the greatest characteristics that I've recognized for people that I really look up to. They make decisions quicker. They act quickly because they're confident in themselves and they're more confident in their ability to figure it out regardless of what happens because they've done this before. So that's everything for today's podcast, how to make or how to approach big decisions, how to create an upper and a lower bound, the guardrails for yourself. We appreciate you all tuning in week after week. I'm actually going to post this video up on YouTube because I recorded it on Zoom. So that's cool. And maybe start posting more videos on YouTube and building out that platform. But at the end of the day, thank you all for tuning in. If you got something of value from this podcast, please make sure you share it with somebody. Click the three dots, press the copy link, text it off to somebody, DM it off to somebody, and also make sure you are subscribed to continue to get every episode that releases. And last but definitely not least, don't forget about our free 28-day masterclass on reinventing your relationships, finding the love that you deserve and so deeply want. We all want that. Um, the reason that Lauren and I are in the place that we are is because we stopped playing the mental gymnastics. We just took action, and we've seen a lot of lows and a lot of highs, and we've bounced between the upper bound and the lower bound. But in doing that, in going through all the difficulties, we found our running mates. We are each other's running mates. I was at the Vault conference with Patrick Bet-David last week, and he talks about the concept of the running mate. And the running mate is the person that you'll go to battle with, the person that you will run alongside and do anything for to make it through. And that is what we're all looking for in our intimate relationships, in our love life. And this reinventing your relationships masterclass will be the foundation for that if you take action on it, if you fully commit yourself to it. So again, click the link in the show notes. Free 28-day masterclass all on reinventing your relationships. Launches October 2nd. If you're listening to this after October 2nd, make sure you still hop on our email list. You can get all of the emails in arrears. And without the recognition that I don't have anything else, without anything else, thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate you. We'll catch you on the next episode. Bye, everybody.